track them. And I thought about that, but then the other thing about May is
There we go. Welcome. Welcome to a welcome to a regular, a city council workshop meeting. Today is September 26th. It is 2 p.m. I'd like to call that meeting to order. We actually have a couple of items to take action on to begin this meeting. Item number A under Finance is Professional Service Agreement, Ringcentral Phone System Service. But I guess before we do that, let's go around the table and introduce ourselves for those either here or watching us. I'm Mayor Bob Severance, and I have Mayor Pro Tem
Beth Munns.
Okay.
Joel Cervedia, City Council.
Rick Almberg, City Council.
Tara Heisen, City Council.
Bill Larson, City Council.
Jim Wiesner, City Council.
Nikki Sparza, City Attorney. Patricia Soul, Finance Director.
And Patricia Soul, Finance Director, gets to handle item 2A at this, or item Finance A.
Yes. So good afternoon. I'm going to start with the Ringcentral RFP and our results of the RFP. So I kind of went through the detail in the agenda bill. We have been talking about switching our phone, fiber, and IT services. Seriously, we had been looking at slowly changing things over, and we received a memo from the school district 60 days, 90 days ago, telling us that the service with them would end on 11/1. So it kind of sped up our process a little bit. We got a couple of RFPs out, this one and the one that will follow, which is fiber. We assembled a team, which included 2 council members, Councilmember Joel Cervadius and Mayor Pro Tem Beth Munns. It also included Sandra Place, our purchasing specialist, Dina Emery, representing the mayor, and Kevin Dresker, our police chief, and myself. And we are the IT team, and so we'd met over this. If you look at the documents that I provided, the first one that I'm going to talk about is the RFP results. So we received for the phone 9 responses, and we went through and we ranked those by, in the selection process I list the different areas we ranked them and the points that we assigned. And at the end of our ranking, 4 out of 6 of the team chose Ringcentral as their number 1 pick. So at that point, we decided that that's who we wanted to go with, and then we started negotiating with them. So if you look at your second document, which is the phones, the one that says phones, I list what the RFP response amount was, and after we negotiated, we were able to save an additional $9,767, and we are able to have what is referred to as a voice over internet protocol. There we go. And it will allow us to have all of our services in the cloud. We won't require any hardware that stores data. The data will all be stored on the cloud. We'll be receiving new phones. They're going to be Polycom phones. We'll have 3 different versions. We'll have just a basic phone for most people. Then we'll have 2 different styles that are have more lines on them. And what else here? It's the other document that I'll refer to both times for you to look at is here. It's the one that I attached to both agenda bills, current cost versus new cost. So the phone and the fiber and the IT support with the school district are all lumped into one total annual price, which is $138,516. And so phone itself, first year outflow will be $52,583, and then the second year will go down to $34,027. When you look at, you had to look at the big picture to see the savings. In the second year, our savings will be approximately, because the support, the information specialist, and the consultant, we don't have those numbers firmed up. We just have best estimate at this point, will be about $38,000 in savings. So the reason for that is we will be able to get rid of a lot of our hard lines, the fax lines, the trunk line, anything but our fire alarms and our credit card lines. And we may be able to switch the credit card lines over. We just didn't want to mess with money yet. So we want the money flowing in on credit cards. So those two might be able to go away. Long distance will go away because we'll have everything but international calls on this. If we do people do make international calls, which they hopefully have good justification for, there will be a charge. So it won't be that you couldn't make it, but it would go above the annual fee that this charged. And I think that's as much detail as that you guys probably want from me at this point. I'll let you ask questions.
So we want to ask for questions from the public at this point. I think we have all the staff here in the audience, but you're welcome to ask a question too. We have questions. Councilor Servadius.
Just a comment, a couple of comments. Obviously, I support this, was very involved following the process, start to finish. Specifically, though, I wanted to thank Sandra and Patricia. You know, you guys jumped in head over heels. I know, Patricia, you were burning the candle at three ends. So while you have this job description, I think of IT or somehow that falls in there, that probably didn't encompass what was thrown at you in such a rushed manner. So I'm very excited about this. I've used Ringcentral for several years now in my business, and I know some people will just see a phone sitting there and think, oh great, it works, but all of the other stuff, as people get familiar with it, the ability, there's just so many features that are available with soft phone apps. I think you're gonna love it, so I hope support it.
Councilor Wiesen.
Thank you. I too just want to comment. I noticed the negotiations that took place, and what we ended up with is the number one vendor with a full set of support suite for less than the cost of the lowest other RFP. So
I'm really pleased.
yeah, I commend you for that, and that's fantastic. We're getting more for less. Also, I just want to point out, you know, it appears as though we're going to be upgrading, obviously, all of our phone systems. This is going to be an upgrade. As we know, technology ages, and this is all going to be brand new, state-of-the-art equipment. And we're going to have some costs with that the first year, but we're going to recoup all the costs in the savings by year two to pay for all of the technology upgrades that are going on, along with having a dedicated IT staffer here available to us versus sharing one with the school district. So I think this is a win-win-win for sure. So I commend everybody on the IT committee for the efforts, and especially staff for doing the negotiations. Good job.
I want to give kudos to Mr. Servadius. He was our strong negotiator. He got us through some of the, we wanted to, he was able to do it very well. We were very pleased to have him on the team. It made it a lot easier. And the part that I didn't describe that I want to make sure you're aware of, we do have a software and IT hardware reserve fund, right? So we already have some of these funds for the hardware replacement in our 502 funds. They won't be funds we'll have to find. I didn't define that yet, but I will when we get to the final quotes for the IT person as well as the consultant. Then I'll be able to tell you for sure exactly what the outflow would be.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Kudos to Sandra and Patricia. And they are tenacious bulldogs at times when it's spending money, let me tell you. But also the school district will be buying our phones back. They're in great shape. They will still need them. So that's not even figured out yet on money recouped from that too. So, and I think the options, I don't know how it'll affect the fire department, but I know for the police department, it's going to be great for them to be able, I think they call it hot desk, where two people are sharing the desk, but someone can come in, put in their code, it's their phone number, their thing, and then if someone else comes that shares that, and it's just a marvelous feature. We're going to be up there.
All right.
We are not going to be in the Stone Ages anymore, so I think it'll be wonderful. So, but thank you really to Sandra and Patricia, because they really helped muddle through some of the terminology I was not familiar with in comparing prices. So they did a fantastic job.
Anyone else? So all we need now is a motion. Councilor Servadius.
I move to authorize the mayor to sign the Ringcentral contract in a form that is acceptable to the city attorney to approve Ringcentral as our phone provider for the city.
Second.
Motion and a second as the recommended action reads in your packet. Motion by Councilor Servadius, second by Mayor Pro Tem. Seeing no other, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Nice job. Sounds like a lot of hard work. Great job. Okay, we'll go to item number B under Finance, Professional Services Agreement, Frontier Fiber Evaluation, Service and Maintenance.
Okay, so this RFP went out at the same time the phone RFP went out. We didn't have as much success with this one. We only received one vendor reply. We had two that came and talked to the group, so we invited people in before we did the RFP to kind of get them to help us as a group understand what features that we may or may not want to include in the RFP, what they felt would be best for the city, and then they were all invited to bid. Two of them didn't feel the timeline was doable, so Ringcentral was the only one that bid, and as such, they were the lowest price. But we went ahead Frontier. I'm sorry, Frontier. What did I say? I'm still, okay. So Frontier. So we had Frontier gave us their RFP responses, so you have this one here instead of two. And on here it shows the RFP response was $12,640 more than what their final price was. And the thing about Frontier that I want to give kudos to is they did the engineering work before they ever did the bid. So when it came time to ask them if they could keep the deadline we set, they had no problem. They have people looking at stuff right away, and they are on top of it. So even though they were our only one, they were the one when they came and talked to us that actually taught us things about our own system that we didn't know. So it was a good feeling. The total price, again, go to the document that has everything on it. So the first year for Frontier is $79,141.78. The second year and going forward will be $19,200. Again, I can't compare that to anything that the school had because it was all combined, but that's what we had. I'm trying to think, they're going to be making sure our fiber, when they're updating our fiber, they're going to be updating, they're splicing in, and then they're going to be looking at the boxes to make sure there's nothing floating out there that we might need. They'll be connecting City Hall and the new treatment plant, so we have redundancy. So they'll be running fiber both directions. So if, say, a tree knocks something down, it gives us a better chance of still having connection to the internet. So, and Eric might have been here, but he's not here. So I was going to let him have his say, but he's not here. So.
City Council?
Oh,
There he is.
there you go.
Hi, Eric.
We were just talking about you.
Councilor Servadius.
This is just, once again, I want to congratulate and thank the team. This is one of those things that it seems very ubiquitous. It should just work, but I think with the upgrades, the hardware, the switches that'll come with this, it's going to be a much, I won't say better hall, a new and improved and more efficient, hopefully, City Hall.
Councilor Wiesner.
Again, I just want to comment about how easy you made this decision for us. It's two separate agenda items, I understand that, but by putting this in perspective on the one form and giving us a true bottom line to look at, I really appreciate that versus us having to do the math ourselves. For those out in the viewing audience, just so you know, $12,000 of that $38,000 savings in that second year is coming from the Frontier fiber optic use of those lines and reducing the amount of trunk lines and switching to this phone system. So it is a contributing factor to the whole scheme of things. So I do certainly appreciate you taking the two agenda items. We're addressing them separately, but giving us one nice piece of document to look at to show us how it's all relative. I appreciate that.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilor Eisen.
I move to approve the recommended action as presented.
Second.
Okay, got a motion to approve the recommended action as presented. Motion by Councilor Eisen, second by Mayor Pro Tem. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, That passes unanimously.
Thank you, Patricia.
So we do have one more action item. Looks like we're running a little ahead of schedule. We'll see how the Chief Treasurer does. And this is purchase authorization, automatic gate installation.
Yes, Mayor, council members, thank you. Wish I brought some pictures of the fence, but I think everybody's seen it. So what we're here today to talk about is the authorization to expend the money that's already been identified to purchase 2 electronic gates for 2 vehicle gates on the fence that has been installed at the back of the police department. The gates, the components include the electronics, the mechanisms, hooking it up, installing all the access panels and everything that's involved. And you've all received the agenda bill, and just to make sure I let you know, and I'm going to start this off a little different with the thank yous at the beginning, and I want to make sure I cover these. So I too, looks like Sandra is just being overwhelmed with praise today. I too want to thank Sandra for, we had a little hiccup with some of the bid type process, and she's been fantastic to work with on that, as has Kathy. And CAC is here, and I want to thank him because we had to work through some landscaping issues, and with all sorts of people. Hank, who's not here, and also Rich. So as is the case in a lot of these types of things, it truly takes the city team involvement to make this stuff come together. And then I also want to thank the mayor for our first part of this project as far as moving forward with the fence and some funds that we had that we were able to allocate for that based on this stuff. So as you know, the city or the police department has been working towards trying to get some security around the back parking lot to secure equipment, personnel, etc. And then it's actually benefited. We've already seen that benefit, and believe it or not, actually Garage of Blessings also seeing a benefit because I think it helps them with some of their parking back there as to how it's structured. In any case, we have 2 vehicular gates that we need to put some access, electronic access level on, and that's what this second project, the project we're addressing today. So we've identified the bidder, and the bid amount to install all components, the installation and carry away and everything is $48,567.16. We've identified funding within the capital budget that's left over from what we purchased the fence with, the remaining money that's in there. Also, ICOM has a vested interest in this. Of course, you know they lease the building from a portion of our building, and in communications with their directors, they had allocated some money for the project. The gates came in a little more than we thought, so we went back to ICOM, and they've come up with the amount that you see there, which is $25,000 to put towards this project. And there'll be some remaining funds that will be somewhere between around 10 to 15,000, probably around 13 something, that I'll end up having to take from my budget from this year. And I've been very careful to try to make sure I leave the money in there and to complete the extra stuff that we've got going on here. We're looking at, I think, around the middle of October potentially still for the electronic gates to be installed. So I'm not seeking funding. We've identified the sources through what we have available. What I'm seeking is approval to move forward with the project. So the recommended action is a motion authorizing staff to purchase 1 automatic gate system from Gateway Controls in the amount of $48,567.16, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
You said 1, but it's 2. It's 2 electronic.
Well, it's 1 system, but
Okay.
it's 2 gates as
Okay.
part of that 1 system. And the other thing that, as you've read in there, this will be simpatico. It'll be consistent with our electronic gates, or electronic doors and stuff that we already have, which is also what Public Works does. So our fobs and all that kind of stuff will work. It'll be a kind of a consistent system with our security measures we already have. But so it's 1 system, but 2 actual gates as part of that system.
Okay. City Council, questions? Input? Motions? Councilor Eisen?
I move to approve the recommended action as presented.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to approve the recommended action as presented. Motion by Councilor Heisen, second by Councilor Servadius. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
So we are now going to our non-action item section, and we will start with our development services. Looks like we have our Director Powers and Senior Planner Cash. All right. Senior Planner Cash, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just want to start the discussion about the capital improvements plan. I know the City Council had a workshop to talk about the budget goals, and we're still kind of working with that information that you provided us in terms of kind of moving the budget along, and also the capital improvements plan. So early input is great anytime we start these projects, and so that's why we're here, just to share a draft with you guys on what we're working on, and then take your comments and then see if we can, you know, put them into the process and bring a document that's acceptable for you guys. So I'm going to start with kind of the planning level, which is usually what I do. It's great to just kind of get the context of what we're doing. Helps people watching at home as well. So I'll go through a quick presentation. I have a few disclaimers. I don't have any detailed numbers on any of the projects. I'm not putting up any kind of a schedule, revenues, or anything of that. We're not there yet. We're working with our finance staff, and we're coming up with some great tools to share with you guys, but that'll be at a future workshop meeting or at a council meeting when we come forward with that information. This is just planning level stuff, projects. Costs are just estimates at this time, and everything is at a point where it can be changed. So that's where we are. Another disclaimer, I also can't speak to every project that's on there. There's water system, sewer system, storm drain. I know enough to kind of get through a discussion, but if there's more details, we'll get information back to you, or if somebody else is here that can help, they can do that as well. So that's out of the way. All right, we'll start. Capital improvements plan, this is kind of a graphic that's in our comprehensive plan. It kind of shows how we kind of plan for the city and what the implementation tools are. And as you can see, capital improvements plan is part of our implementation. We have all these plans. They're adopted at various times based on when they are adopted, schedule-wise and expiration date-wise. And we generate a set of projects with these plans, and then eventually they kind of filter into the capital improvements plan, which is a 6-year span of window. And then the actual real implementation comes with the 2-year budget. And this year is it's a great opportunity because we have the 6-year comprehensive plan, and then you're doing the 2-year budget. So you'll see for sure what are some of the projects that are moving forward with your budget approval. What's a capital facility? We have
question already?
Oh, go ahead.
What's the difference between mandated versus required?
The little legend on the bottom, mandated, optional, required.
So mandated applies to the elements up. So here we have the comprehensive plan and the elements that are mandated that we have in our comprehensive plan. So land use, transportation, housing, parks, economic development, capital facilities, and utilities are mandated by GMA. We have chosen to have urban design, UGA, government services, and community coordination as additional elements in the plan. And then when you get down to the blue, these are the things that are required by the GMA to be part of that comprehensive plan.
Okay,
So,
gotcha.
yeah.
Thank you.
Good question. So, capital facility, the definition of it is, any facility that's going to be $50,000 or greater, requires the expenditure of public funds, and is going to have a life expectancy of 20 years. So, these are big ticket items that the city plans for, so that's what you'll see in the capital improvements plan. If it's $45,000, it probably won't be in the capital improvements plan. It'll be in your budget document, though. That's where you kind of have to make that link. We also define what a capital maintenance project is, and these are like for street overlays. You're not reconstructing a street; you're just coming and doing an overlay. Again, the cost is above $50,000. expenditure of public funds, and it extends the life of that infrastructure for 10 years, then we'll have that in the CIP as well. So the current document has has 4 goals and policies underneath that, and I just paraphrase them. Basically, what the goals are trying to do is to provide adequate facilities and services for the existing and future population. For any planning we do based on population projection, we do a 20-year projection, and we kind of plan for that. So that's kind of without any decreased level of service. That's the key here. You want to provide service without decreased level of service. You want to plan in accordance with the policies and priorities set by the City Council. We have those in our plan as well. You want to finance the projects in an economic, efficient, and equitable manner. This comes from how the budgets are kind of categorized, how funds are categorized. Equitable is, you hear people in the community say, why is the city spending, $50,000 here? They should have done that instead. Well, we have different funds to do the different projects, right? And so equitable means that we make sure that sewer projects are getting done as much as water projects are getting done, and so on. So cost-effective services to be provided for the within the city and for the land that we annex. So these are the major goals in our capital improvements plan, and under them there are several policies. I won't go into them in detail. They are in the current CIP document, and we're not anticipating making any changes to these goals or policies. You're probably aware of a lot of the revenue sources that come to the city. I just thought I'll list them. So general fund revenue, that's where your taxes and state shared revenue, license and permit fees kind of go into. We have the special revenues, which is the motor fuel tax, the 2%, the lodging tax, impact fees, refunds, those are all our special revenue. You have debt service, general obligation bonds, you also track those in the CIP. And then you have grants. And then you have the enterprise of the proprietary funds, sewer, water, that are managed by the fees that they generate within that fund. So we have a lot of revenues coming into the city, and we have to somehow manage them in a logical way, in a consistent way. So as you are all aware, through the budget process, there are funds that are created with the revenues, and these revenue sources come with strings attached in terms of what you can use them for and how you can use them. And then there are additional policies that the City Council may create for every fund. So these are contained in the budget document. Just wanted to show a reference to those, because when you see a CIP document and you have the projects in the tables, at the bottom you'll have revenues, and it will show you the different revenue sources that are funding a particular project. So I just thought I would share that information. So what's in our current, what's a CIP document usually have? As I mentioned, goals and policies. It has financial management policies on how, on some of the policies related to funds and revenues. It has an inventory of existing facilities. It, from all the plans, like the transportation plan and the park plan, we take the level of service from that information, we'll pull it into the CIP along with population projections. And then the meat of the plan is the facility plan, the 6-year plan where we look at the projects. And then we have the facility needs. All our plans identify a 20-year need of projects. We can only do 6 years worth of projects, but we list all the 20-year needs in there just as a way every year when we amend our CIP, we pull projects in based on opportunity and funding, so we have them as needs listed in the CIP. And then we have funding source revenue projections. So these are, we kind of know for the most part what revenue we may be getting in 2019, but we're relying on our finance department to do some projections for 6 years so that we can kind of plan our projects over 6 years. And so we have some general information on how we do those projections for each of the funds. So that's what's in our current CIP. Nothing is going to change this year. It's going to remain the same. And so we'll dive into.
Can I make a
yes, absolutely.
So the key then between the 6-year list of projects and the 6-year funding schedule is the state law requires us to have a reasonable funding schedule or reasonable funding approach to those projects we identify in the 6 years. Obviously, we know more about the first 2 years part of the budget process than we do with years 3 through 6. But there's actually a requirement that we present a reasonable estimate of how we're going to fund all of those projects. After year 6 through year 20, we have no obligation to show how we're going to fund those projects, and that's why you'll see those different lists as well. So keep in mind that it's a state law requirement that we show that information.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah.
Mr. Powers, isn't it true that we have to have the project on a list in order to apply for certain funds? I mean, we move things around, but if it's not on the list, then
Yes.
it isn't happening. So just
Cer-
because
certain-
we don't have the funding, but at least if it's on the list, we can always move it up.
Correct.
Or down.
Certain funding sources require as one of their checks in the box that it be included in your locally adopted CIP. So for instance, when we apply for the .09 funds through the county, absolutely has to be in our capital improvement plan in order for us to even to get through the front door. And the same is true for some of the state sources that we would pursue.
Thank you very much.
All right. So we'll jump into some of the projects that are currently tracking. Again, this is a draft. There may be some minor additions or dropouts, but this is kind of what's tracking in the street side. So just like how in the budget we have different funds that are managed for the CIP, we categorize them a little differently. Even though these projects are funded by different funds, you may have some coming from the general fund, some coming from the impact fees in terms of how projects get funded. CIP categorizes, we have like 5 or 6 categories, that's just for planning purpose. So these are the street projects that we have tracking. The Waterfront Trail, Veterans Park, we are in the design. We've almost completed the design phase, and that will hopefully be doing construction in 2019. So what I have here on the right, like I said, I don't have numbers kind of distributed over the 6 years. I kind of just have some green squares. This is like the sheet that I think you got at your project meeting. That's where we are still at the planning phase. We're still moving numbers around, trying to make it work. So we're not ready to share that information yet. So, but at the next workshop, I'm hoping that we can have some more numbers to look at. But this is just a kind of a planning level information. So we have Waterfront Trail. We have the Boyer Property Access Road. It's been, last year it was in our economic development kind of a section of the CIP. It still remains there, but we'll also put it under streets because it is a street project. We definitely want to do some maintenance project. The asphalt street overlays are maintenance projects, and we'll probably have a set amount every year that we're hoping to dedicate towards that. This is a more recent addition to the CIP, which is the shoreline restoration between Midway and Regatta. I think there's been some erosion type issues identified along that stretch. It's a very important asset to our community in terms of street, waterfront trail, utilities, and so on. And so it'd be good to start looking at that before it gets too out of hand that we may have to do something major, some replacement. So that has been that's kind of added in this year. It's a new project. Hoffman to 16th Trail project. I talked to City Council a couple of workshops ago about coordinating with the county to get a mile's worth of trail or sidewalk from the park and ride north of town by Oakfield Road all the way to Northeast 16th. It's a collaborative project, and there's RTPO funds for it, grant funds. And for $78,000 to get a mile of trail coming into the city is a really good deal. I think we'll try and work with them on that one. Northwest Heller Street overlay is on, and for the later years we have some grant money for this, and some of these schedules will match up the tip that City Council approved, I think at the last month. And then we have Northeast 7th. We have design and right-of-way construction, the $1 million, and so is for just the design and the right-of-way acquisition. That project will still need construction dollars, and we'll have to apply to the RTPO to do that. Yes.
Say those numbers again. You didn't say 1.1 for design.
Design and right-of-way.
Okay.
So I don't know the splits in the cost, but
It's okay.
right now, yeah.
You said 1.1.
I know.
If we say it quietly, maybe you won't hear us.
Yeah.
Design and acquisition.
Design and right-of-way
Right.
acquisition,
Okay.
so, yes.
The
And,
other-
and these are planning level estimates, and this is what we have grant money for. So what it is our portion of the expense in these, some of these projects that have the RTPO dollars is much less. It'll just be a pass-through. We have RTPO grants for that, and that'll be listed in the project's details when we come forward. So.
The document will acknowledge the fact that the council formed the Transportation Benefit District earlier this year. It will not account for any revenue coming from that because as a body, we haven't gotten to that point yet. And so next year's CIP then will include presumably funds which we would anticipate being created through the Transportation Benefit District.
Any other questions on that? All right. Parks. One of the things that came out of the meeting, I think the budget priority meeting, is that the council is interested in investing in the parks. And so these are the projects that are kind of tracking thus far. The Windjammer Park playground equipment, on the east side playground equipment, I think Hank has some plans to make it bigger and better. So allocated some money for that. Neal Tower renovation, that's a historical marker in our town that could use some help. And then one of the priorities in our park plan is to make sure that our existing park playground equipment gets upgraded. So we have 4 parks tracking for that. We have the Harbor Heights land acquisition, and this is for the next major kind of Fort Nugent Park to the north end of town, and we're in negotiations, and I think the council is aware of that. So we are on the edge of trying to get some grants and maybe hear from them. So that's also tracking, and that'll be a long-term project. Will be in the CIP for quite a while. This is just for the acquisition, and then we'll have improvements. It took 20 years or so to build Fort Nugent, so this will take some time falling into, and so we'll track that. The pickleball courts, these are coming from recent public input processes regarding parks. The pickleball is picking up as a good sport in Oak Harbor. There's a lot of people playing that. So Hank has some ideas on how to put some pickleball courts in Neal Park. And then the 7th Avenue Wetlands Trail feasibility study. This has been tracking for quite a while. We think it's a great investment. It's in the park plan, and it would serve an area of town that doesn't have much trails, and it also has a wide variety of land uses around it. This goes again to that equitable goal in our comp plan, trying to make sure that we address areas of need within town. And so we have a feasibility study in the later part of the 6 years to try and identify how we can build trails. And hopefully it'll all kind of come together with the 7th Avenue improvements and all of that. When that area starts to get some focus, maybe we can try and move some of these things along. And of course, Windjammer Park Phase 2 and Phase 3 is also is tracked as part of parks. Yes.
Question on Phase 2, Phase 3. It's my understanding that we've been awarded about $750,000 from the county for, is it the pavilion or is it Patricia? It's up to the mayor to tell me what my question is. What is that money designated for, and is it in Phase 1 or Phase 2?
Phase 1, and it's for the pavilion.
Is Phase 1 is the pavilion in Phase 1?
Yes,
And you're absolutely sure?
absolutely sure.
And absolutely sure that the award of that money is consistent with what the commissioners think?
Yes, they actually received a grant document which Steve presented, asking for West Kitchen and pavilion funds. They chose to just fund the pavilion. The cost of the pavilion per Hoffman's contract was $698 something.
And our documents are consistent with what the language is regarding phase 1, phase 2 with the county?
The county understood that it was in phase 1, and we have yet to receive the grant document from the county to see what they've written, but that is what they were told the grant.
Okay. The only reason I bring this up is I don't know the details, obviously, the way the rest of you know this. But a conversation that I had with one of the commissioners seems like there's perhaps a disconnect in that language. And I'm just presenting that as a cautionary comment to maybe you want to double check that.
Steve could probably respond exactly what was said at the meeting, because he presented it to us.
I think I understand the source of that confusion. There was an email that came, I think, to us that referred to it as the amphitheater. But the mayor's shaking his head, and I believe that the mayor's office has confirmed that it in fact is the pavilion.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was initially just mischaracterized in the formal email. But again, that topic came up. But we presented an application for the West Side Kitchen and for the pavilion were the application that we presented.
No further question or comment? Yeah, we covered it.
Okay, all right, we'll check it out. Wastewater fund, this is, as you can see, it's a proprietary fund, mostly done with all this sewer fees and the rates associated with that. The major projects over here, there's the infrastructure. We have a sewer, comprehensive sewer improvement plan, and it lists a whole bunch of projects that the city needs to do to keep the infrastructure up and running. And there are some sewer line replacements, old asbestos pipes and things like that that gets replaced. So we do that routinely for different areas. The southeast part of town gets a little attention over the next couple years in terms of those replacements. And of course, I left a blank with the wastewater treatment plant. Those numbers are still being worked on with our finance department. So as the document moves forward, we'll bring more appropriate numbers to that. And of course, you can see the water center is tracking in this as well. It will be a shared project. Again, when it comes through the CIP, you'll see the revenue sources at the bottom in terms of all the funds that are going to support that. I think it's a shared facility between water, wastewater, storm, and other funds. So there'll be many funds that will contribute towards running that center that is planned for at the wastewater treatment plant. So.
My Kathy Rosen comment for you is that while our focus has been on the clean water facilities these last many years, we have other sewer projects that we need to be doing as well, which is why you see a fairly sizable list of projects that aren't associated with the clean water facility.
Right.
I've been paying attention.
Water system, we have a separate fund for that. A lot of projects, and Kathy can correct me if I'm wrong. Some of these projects are kind of related to each other. You know, they lead into one another in terms of timing and how things happen. I don't know the details of every project. This is part of my disclaimer, but my general understanding is that there's going to be some improvements that are, the water system plan identifies the city in zones, and there are a couple of zones that are in focus for the next couple of years. One is the east side zone, which I think is going to use the new Gun Club Road reservoir to equalize the pressure along the east side by having a water pipe infrastructure upgrade from the reservoir to Crescent Harbor Road. And then there's also some plans on the west side of things, which I think is along Pella Road. So these are things that come from our water system plan. Usually we have some studies in place that kind of have some improvements to the system, and as we do improvements, the system is better, and some projects kind of drop off or some infrastructure gets dropped off. I think you'll see some demolition of some water reservoirs that we don't need anymore with the new reservoir in place. And so we're trying to make sure that we keep improving the system so that it serves our citizens. Yes.
I don't see here offhand but, Regatta Road, where it hits Crescent Harbor, the county's going to lower, and we voted to maybe have our arts, on the wall thing. Are we gonna have to move a water line, or will they move it?
It's the second project.
Oh, it's the second project? Oh, that one, okay.
We will pay for the relocation of it, but it will happen with the county project. So the county's contractor will do that relocation for us. Is there's going to be
Okay.
construction improvements.
Rather than us have a separate construction
Right.
contract in the middle of their construction
I
project.
remember having that
Yeah.
discussion when that project came up. Okay, thank you. Sorry,
It's a big
my
list.
eyes didn't
Yeah.
register, so I'm sorry. I knew you guys would be up on it, I just didn't see it, so, okay, thank you.
Councilor Holmberg.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Has that project been bid yet?
No, there's been some easement issues with the Navy regarding regatta that are being resolved right now.
And what impact is that for our share? Because we're just relocating an existing line.
It's basically some cleanup of some old easements. As far as I know, there's no cost to that, it's just time and staff time. And it's a delay of implementing the project plus the staff time involved.
So is that a county obligation to clear that title for those easements, or are we active in that?
It's a joint effort because one of the easements is in favor of the city of Oak Harbor and one of them is in favor of the county.
Okay,
So it's joint.
thank you.
Moving along. Stormwater, we have a few projects that deals with some outfall repair on the east side and west side of Windjammer Park, I think. Maybe Kathy can help me out with this. And then we have the Friend Marsh feasibility study in there as well. And I think maybe I'm thinking ahead a little bit with all, stormwater is such an important infrastructure in all our development and activity going forward. I can see as we amend our CIP over the next 6 years that we'll be looking at more different issues and different projects that may have to be tackled as part of that. But this is the list that's tracking from our existing stormwater plan. These are some of the improvements that are tracking. Marina, we did.
Yeah, one question for you on that. The Friend Marsh feasibility study, does that include possibly increasing the stormwater holding capacity, storage capacity in that? Is that part of the discussion? That is part of the discussion?
The feasibility of that very
Okay.
subject.
And then the next question is, if we increase the storage volume, does that solve the overflow problem at the catch basins at Bayshore and Beaksville?
Possibly. That whole solution has many different parts to it.
Right.
But it would allow us to open up the pipe that we put across the highway. Remember before the highway before WashDOT repaved the highway, we put in a line underneath it, but it's plugged. So if it's feasible to expand storage capacity in the marsh, it would allow us to open up that pipe and that would help reduce some of the drainage damage.
So that is definitely one of the target that we have for
Yes.
increasing the volume.
And the other thing is we're also, given the new stormwater permit that's coming up, we need to look for some ways for treatment, additional treatment.
Treatment and habitat.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions. Okay. marina projects, we didn't actually have marina projects the last CIP. So we've had some new projects that is just part of our upgrades and maintenance. And Steve may be more aware of these projects than I am.
Yeah, the bottom three are the ones that we've talked to you consistently about over the last couple of years that we've been pursuing the different grants through the ILIO, basically the environmental clean water kinds of grants to do those projects. We've not given up the ship on those yet. And the first two are relatively self-explanatory. The FDOC pile hoops will be something that would be done incrementally as time permits for our. We think that I believe Chris believes our staff can do the replacement for the majority of them, but we need the actual hoops themselves. And something that we have not yet had a chance to get onto this schedule, which came out of your budget priorities conversation, was the concept of beginning to talk about studying the dredging project. And so I think it's our intention to create that as a project here, putting it in 2024. I'll tell you right now that it'll be an educated guess as to what we think that preliminary look at it will be, just in terms of the study. What I think we'll do is we'll go back and we'll look at what we did when we dredged a number of years ago, do some gross extrapolation from that, and then use a percentage of that to figure out what we think the initial look-see might take us. That'll get us in the ballpark, and then as we get closer to that time, we'll work to refine it.
And then we have a section for general government, which is usually facilities and city-owned buildings and such, and we have a few projects that are tracking for the fire department and improving their facility. And also I know the West Side Fire Station has been in the discussion for quite a while. It's outside of the biennium budget, but it's still tracking in the CIP. So those are the kind of capital improvement projects that are tracking currently in our CIP, and I'm hoping at the next workshop that all those green squares will actually be numbers. So that's what I'm hoping to share at the next. But I just wanted to get the conversation started, get your input, get the discussion going. Any questions?
Questions? Yes. Usually copy that Excel, this PowerPoint, just slide.
Yeah,
Sure.
please send PowerPoint.
Please.
Absolutely, can do that, no problem. Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We'll move on to finance again. Under non-action items, we have an A and a B. A is stability fund code discussion. B will be fire fees. So have our finance director, Patricia Soul, back with us.
Thank you. So I have handouts. Let me get them for you. And I'll also be showing the handouts on the screen, but you can take them with you when you go that way. I did. I did it back and front and back though. So I wanted to have some discussion with council about the current code we have for the general fund revenue stabilization. And I'm going to kind of lead us through this, list some options, give my recommendation, and then take your, what you would like to see. Our current language in the Oak Harbor Municipal Code is in Chapter 3.09. It was set by ordinance on July 3rd of 2012. The purpose of the code was to identify, reserve, and accumulate unexpended general fund resources in order to mitigate impacts of future unanticipated general fund revenues, shortfalls, budgetary imbalances, and shortages in working capital, and to provide revenue for emergency or other exigent circumstances. The thing that finance cares about is how it is calculated. 25% of prior year revenues or $3 million, whichever is greater, must be assessed at the end of the year and moved out of general fund into the stability fund. The only way that it can be used is council has to do a written finding that there are exigent circumstances or emergency that requires the use of city general fund reserves. A minimum of 4 votes appropriates all or part of the available reserves. And how it's worked, I just wanted to give you a history. So it looks like the code was passed in 12, so the first year it looks like there was a significant amount transferred over. Then in 13, I think, I wasn't here so I don't know, but in 15, 16, and 17, we transferred exactly the 25%, and the current balance at the end of 17 was $3,860,699. The use of the stability funds happened this year on April 17th of 2018. We passed a resolution allowing the use of the funds $711,076 for Windjammer Park improvements. Repayment of the funds is why I'm here today. There's no language written addressing how to repay the outlay of those funds. Due to all funds all funds must be repaid as part of the 25% calculation of prior year revenue, or $3 million, whichever is greater. Potential repayment as code requires. The beginning balance was $3,008,000. We used $711,000. We have $3,089,699 sitting there. If general fund revenues come in at this 217 amount of the 15,202,797, the transfer would be a minimum of 711,076 at the end of 18. If it comes in higher, then that number will go up.
Hold on, just a question here.
Sure.
So
I
the
think my
amount
math
that
is
we
not-
transferred,
711,076.
yeah. And at the end of, okay, wait a minute, because we're dealing with the same number. I was thinking at the end of 18.
And we haven't got to the end of
Yeah,
18.
okay, yep.
Okay. Are we good to go?
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Okay. So the impact to general fund, transfer of funds to meet the stability fund code has the potential to tie up resources that are needed to balance the budget. And a transfer of that magnitude shifts operating capital improvement funds to a locked fund, unable to be used unless there's an emergency or exigent circumstances. What are the best practice options? I researched this. I looked at GFOA, I looked at MRSC, and I looked at some other cities with reserve policies, and I'm going to go through each one of those. GFOA guidelines in an article called Fund Balance Guidelines for the General Fund. The summary of their recommendations is that you need to have a policy on the level of unrestricted fund balance that should be maintained in the general fund or for GAAP and budgetary purposes. GFOA recommends an unrestricted fund balance in the general fund of no less than 2 months of regular general fund revenues or expenditures. GFOA did not address the need for a separate set of funds for reserves. Oak Harbor currently has a comprehensive financial management policy that was implemented on August 6th of 2014, and a fiscal emergency policy was implemented on January 6th of 2015. In the comprehensive financial management policy, there is a section on operating fund balance policy, and we practice that we keep unencumbered beginning fund balance in the amount of 16.67% of the fund balance that's available. That sits in the fund and it is not part of the budget. GFOA guidance on use and replenishment of the unrestricted fund balance. A fund policy should define conditions warranting its use. And if a fund balance falls below the government's policy level, a solid plan to replenishment. 3 factors: you need time, period, and use. Will expenditure revenues needs adjust going forward? Need to address that, and the time period to repay the funds. Generally, it's replenished within 1 to 3 years of use unless there are extenuating circumstances, economic downfall, something that can be identified that would prohibit the city from being able to do so. Now we get to MRSC guidance. MRSC says the need for the reserves fall into the following categories: future outlays for capital, liability accrues for employee buyouts, say vacation, compensatory time, sick time, emergencies and unforeseen events that would trigger need. So I want to address those as to what we currently have. We have an equipment replacement fund, IT support, an IT support, software, and hardware fund that's in the equipment replacement. And we also have liabilities that we set up for the value of what the vacation and sick leave payout is in our balance sheet at the end of every year. So it's already segregated as a commitment to the city. So I just wanted to let you know we do that. And they also say to define the use for each reserve fund setup.
One question.
Yes.
Sorry for the interruption. Go back to the MRSC guideline, emergency reserve. Are you saying we have an emergency reserve, and then I'll ask you to define that, in addition to the stabilization fund?
Yes, we have 16.67% that we do not budget that is sitting in all of our operating funds. Sewer fund has 25% that we do not budget. So there's cash sitting there that's unbudgeted, unencumbered funds that are not budgeted as part of the budget process.
And we have a fund for current and future capital needs reserve too.
We have that as our equipment reserve
And
fund.
that's part of the 16+%,
It's in addition to,
in addition to.
it's in Fund 502.
Okay, I'm just, sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
What kind of dollars does that 16.67%?
I address that coming up.
Okay.
Okay. So, to define the use, they say the key components of the fund balance and reserve policy should have scope and purpose, appropriate fund balance level, and use and replenishment of the fund. The piece that's missing from ours is how we replenish it. So at a minimum, I hope we can address that. The types of reserves that are out there per MRSC: contingency reserves, rainy day funds, emergency reserves, current and future capital needs reserve, liability reserve for compensated absences. So I highlighted in red the ones that I feel we already have, but so then the minimum fund balance for the general fund should be no less than what will be needed to meet the average cash flow needs. Typically no less than 2 months of operating expenditures, which we do as part of our budget process. What are other cities doing? I thought these are the ones that MRSC noted in their article, so I went out to each one of those cities and I'll give you a summary of what they do. So Redmond has a general operating reserve, which is similar to our stabilization fund. But they only put 8.5% of total general fund revenue segregated for use on a one-time basis to support city services. During one biennium, it's replenished by the next biennium. And of course, unless exigent circumstances occur. They have other reserves similar to us. They have a fleet maintenance reserve, which we call equipment reserve. They have a fire equipment reserve, which we don't have, and they have a capital equipment reserve for general asset replacement. And that's also part of our equipment reserve. So we kind of have both in one. City of Mukilteo, they have general operating reserves 2 months, 16.67%. They have other reserves. The one that I found interesting was the hotel and motel lodging tax reserve. They keep 1 year of revenues as their reserve that they don't spend. The rest of it they grant out. We kind of do that ourselves, but we haven't formalized that. They have a technology replacement reserve, a health self-insured administration reserve, equipment and vehicle maintenance replacement reserve, and a surface water utility fund reserve, which is stormwater. I had to be told that. I wasn't sure what that was. City of Leavenworth, they have general operating reserves of at least 15% of general fund budgeted revenue. They're striving to build it. This was written a while ago. I don't know the date off the top of my head, by 2020. When they have city surpluses, they use those to fund one-time operations, capital expenditures, or dedication to a capital facility planned expenditure or used to increase the minimum up to 25%. City of Bainbridge Island has an emergency reserve of a flat $1 million. Requires a vote of no less than 5 members of City Council or a unanimous vote of the legal quorum to use. General fund minimum balance is 25% of ongoing revenues as unencumbered funds. Kind of how we do ours, but theirs is a little higher. The City of DuPont, hope I said that right. They have a general operating strategic reserve, which is 10% of general fund and general fund supported budgets. It requires council approval to use. They have a general fund ending fund balance of at least 10% of budgeted operating revenues, and they have a contingency account of 0.5% of general fund expenditures that it's not required to be maintained annually. And then I put ours. We have a general fund revenue stabilization fund, 25% of prior year's revenues. We have a general fund operating reserve, unencumbered, 16.67% of general fund beginning balance. And we have other reserves, our equipment replacement reserve and our technology, hardware, and support reserve. Our stability fund current balance is the $3,089,699. The unencumbered general fund piece at the beginning of the year was $2,583,613. The total is $5,673,312. So if you look at that as a percentage of general fund revenues, that's 37.31%. If you look at it as a percentage of 2017's expenditures, that's 38.97%. My concerns: segregating between 37 and 39% of general fund resources creates a burden on the sustainability of the general fund operating budget. It creates minimal, if any, funds that can be used for facility repairs and maintenance. And we are reserving 5 months of expenditures, 3 months longer than the GFOA recommends and significantly more than the other cities are doing. What are the potential options for council to consider? First option, change the language to address the repayment of resources over time versus in 1 year, as well as what it can be used for. So current language requires immediate replenishment based on the formula, and it can only be used for emergency or exigent circumstances. Potential language could be adjusted to include time to repay the funds and flexibility for what the funds could be used for, one-time expense or something else that allows more flexibility, still requiring the council approval but giving more flexibility. Second option, change the maximum amount of the fund to a set amount, not based on a percentage. So $1 million, Bainbridge Island is the example. Set an amount we want to reach and maintain, $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million. Option 3, change the maximum amount of the fund to a lower percentage. 8.5 is what Redmond has, 10% is what DuPont has, and I took that as a percentage of our revenues of 2017. So if you go from 8.5, that's be 1.292, up to 15, which would be 2.2 million. Next option. Include the 2-month reserve as part of the 25% percentage, keeping the current configuration as an unbudgeted reserve and the stability fund reserve. So 16.67, the 2.5 million would be the unencumbered fund balance, and 8.33% of that would be in the revenue stabilization fund, bringing our total up to the 25%, or $3,800,690. Combination of options presented: repayment language, calculation for maximum versus greater than, amount of percent or set dollar, ensure the percent is sustainable. Staff recommendations: repayment language that addresses a timeline and any economic circumstances. First recommendation. Second one, reduce the percentage to a maximum between 8.5 and 10%. Or, I didn't put this, or the combination of up to 25. Third, make language for use of funds more flexible while retaining required council approval on the stabilization fund. I was thinking things like one-time use or unanticipated expenditure requirements, something like that. And now, what would council like to see? What options were you interested in? What would you like me to bring forward before the end of the year?
Forgive me if this is a stupid question, but I was kind of, I think I might have been hearing two different things, that we're concerned about the language of replenishing and paying back the fund, but I'm also hearing that we probably have too much set aside. Can you reconcile those for me?
In my opinion, and looking at best practices, we have significantly more than what the best practice recommends, and significantly more than what the other cities have segregated in a fund that is unusable unless it goes to council.
And the language about replenishing the fund is
Not there.
just like a housekeeping
Yeah.
thing? Okay. I was like, why are we worried about repaying if we already have more? Anyway, okay, that makes sense.
Councilor Holmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, it's my understanding that one of the reasons we got a fairly high bond rating was because of our financial position.
they only looked at the sewer fund.
They did not look at our total finances?
They looked at the revenue bonds, look at specifically the fund that the revenue bonds are in.
So if we go into some other bonding capacity, will they look at our total finances, including the sewer, because we have a big debt out there?
They're going to keep the sewer as proprietary by itself unless for some reason we don't do what is recommended by HDR to keep our rates at a level that pays for the debt. Part of the rate study is to ensure we have the funding to pay those expenses and also have some program income in case of an emergency. So we have that language built in and that calculation built into the rate study, and that is separate from the general fund. If the general fund had significant debt or low cash, we didn't have a minimum of 2 months balance, or we didn't have something in place, then they would look at our repayment of that debt. We have, I think, a GO bond that's a very small payment every year. I don't have that number with me, but we're very low debt in anything. The only significant debt we have is the sewer plant.
For me personally, I'm more inclined to support really conservative monetary policy, and particularly in good times. It's much better to prepare for tough times and the good times. I've seen this, in the city as a council member. I also saw the recovery we had to go through at Island Transit District. And so I kind of tilt toward the very conservative side of this. At the same time, for me personally, I don't like to see taxpayers' dollars unnecessarily parked someplace that isn't working for them. And working for them is part of services and equipment, etc. So I'm inclined to want to really think about this and have more discussion about it rather than having a fast food
Perfectly fine
resolution
with
to
me,
this
yes. The goal
this
was,
topic.
no action was taken. This was for you guys to have what you needed to help come up with, hopefully, some changes.
Thanks for this, Patricia. One of the things I would like to say moving forward, I'm not ready to make a decision either, so I'm glad this isn't actionable. But looking at the different options and the different ways other cities are doing this, I do not like a solid monetary number on there.
It doesn't
I don't
allow
think
for
that,
growth.
yeah, I don't think we should build that into the towers at all. But I would be willing to look at a slight reduction. Again, I'm rather fiscally conservative as well. Things are pretty okay right now financially, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be. So although we're saving more than other cities, I say good for us. I don't think we need to follow their, anyone else's lead here. But I do think that, we could maybe free up some of this money. What I'd like to see in the future is, what does 3 months look like? And you said, some people look at 2 months, some we've got 5. So where in the mix do
So
we
I-
come down a little bit, and what do those percentages look like?
Yep, I can do that.
Just clarifying, you said you like or don't like a fixed number?
I do not like a fixed number. I like a fixed percentage, as opposed to the example here in Bainbridge. They have an emergency reserve of $1 million. If we set a set amount based on what we feel is going to work right now, as inflation and other factors come into play, then that fixed number doesn't adjust. Whereas if we have a percentage, or if we say so many months of operating funds, that is flexible and it moves with what it costs us to actually run
Sure.
our expenses.
And so, just so you know, right now, if you look at the combination of the money we set aside, it's up to 38%. That's more than, that's 5 months.
Right.
So, just keep that in mind.
The reason I asked, I wanted to do that thought. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I'm wondering, right now we've got a general fund that's been growing. What happens when it doesn't grow? Do we do nothing, or we slide some money back over to bring it below 25%?
We could have language that if there is surplus, that we set it aside. I would prefer it to be, in my opinion, for the ability to operate. been before council quite a few times where we're concerned about sustainability of paying a living wage. We're concerned about sustainability of adding a body. Those kind of things feel like we're looking at them with, we've already taken a chunk of our sustainability out of there, right? And I get we need reserves to save for the rainy day, but do we need almost 40% of our revenues to be saved for a rainy day? And is that reasonable? I don't know. I don't feel it is. That's why I brought it before you guys. Again, you're the policy setting body. It's fully in your hands, but I am concerned with that.
I don't disagree with that. That's where I was going with that. I was trying to figure out percent. We can say let's add another month, 8-ish%. But if you have a fixed dollar amount, then we're not going back and pulling it out or putting it back in. So I want to think on that one. And I guess if we did do a reduction, which I would probably support at this time, is we have a very clear plan for where that money's going. I'm always hesitant to create ongoing expenses, i.e. whatever it is.
Yep.
For obviously what comes to mind is staff, right? That's an ongoing expense, but if it's necessary, but that we would all be on the same page as whatever that chunk goes to, whether it's a big jump start on Windjammer Park, the Harbor Heights.
Right.
Well, I want to have a plan for that if we do.
For the one-time expenses.
Well, and that one, that's going to be a very significant
Right.
chunk of money that might flow out, that it just doesn't flow into the general fund and then get nibbled at, that we have a plan if we do release those funds.
And I wanted to respond to you. If you look at the option where it breaks out the 25% between 16.67 and the 8.33, that is 3 months. 25% is 3 months of the revenue. So it's $3,806,990 in total.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Wiesman?
Thank you, Mayor. First off, I just wanted to also, some of the same sentiments, certainly something we'll, I think, need to look at and think on real hard. This is what the governing body does, right? We make sure that the town is protected through our fiscal prowess, and at the same time, we understand we have to give the staff the money to operate with, and having the money set aside, not doing anything is obviously a concern. What I did want to comment on is I do appreciate options. Thank you so much. Thank you for, I don't know if any of these options are the ones we're going to end up with, but the fact you gave us some options and some different avenues to think about, I appreciate that greatly. Often we end up finding ourselves just not thinking outside the box and when we're making these decisions, and the fact you provide some options is greatly appreciated. So I appreciate the fact that we're going to have some time to think on this. It is an important thing to decide. It's one of the ways we set the precedent for the future of our city. Thank you.
Thank you. I was here when we were losing 18% revenue every year for about 5 or 6 years, and we saw some staff just happen to retire, but others that moved away, they weren't replaced because we didn't have the funds to sustain the salaries. And you saw the toll on staff. I mean, there were a lot of things they couldn't get to, and we couldn't afford to farm it out, so I'd rather have more than less, but also 38% seems like it's too much. We should be taking that money and putting it to work. I too really like the different options. You've made this thinking different. Give us some things to look at that aren't all the same. It isn't just trying to put us down one narrow path that you think we ought to go. You're had a lot of options, and you still may do that, but at least you've gotten us thinking about it, and hopefully we'll come up with more questions. But I do not like that just $1 million. I think that's wrong. As we've learned, because we are on an island, we're maybe the last to suffer the loss in revenue, but we're also really slow in getting it back. We're looking pretty good right now, but it's not as well as when the car dealerships were still in town, or when, there's a lot of avenues that haven't come back and may not. And so I think we need to be prudent, but there's a point of too much. Let's figure out how it should go to good use and not have that a well planned out direction instead of.
Sure. And what I can bring back, and I would like us to kind of decide what day you would like, when you'd like to come back, because I would like at least a repayment language before the end of the year, because that could put us in a bind for budget. But I would like to know, I would like to bring back also the percentage of what we're putting aside for our equipment reserve and for our technology. That doesn't come into, when you look at what we're setting aside, it's money that's sitting there to purchase things that some cities don't have. So I didn't quantify that this time, but when I come back, I'll quantify that also. And is there anything else you guys would like me to quantify before we come back?
Councilor Hazen.
I am curious about what. First of all, I agree with what everybody has said. I would definitely lean towards the conservative side of saving probably a little more than we might think we need. That makes me feel better. But on the other hand, when our infrastructure is crumbling and we're lamenting the fact that we can't hire more staff, that also, isn't copacetic. So I am wondering, hypothetically, if we were today to say, okay, we're going to do the 25% instead of the almost 40 that we do, what would that look like? Would that money just get dumped right into the general fund and be an increase? Like what would that look like?
And that's the language that I would need the council to guide me on.
Mm-hmm.
I would think we'd want to sequester that in a way that it could be used for one-time expenses during the budget process.
Okay.
Or during the fiscal year. I don't think it should be as sequestered as the Revenue Stability Fund is. I think it should be able to be operating within the city. We come forward and say this is what we'd like to use these funds for, and not can only be used for exigent or emergencies. It can be used for something that we're planning. And then whatever percent we set, that's what we leave in the stabilization fund. The other part goes into some sort of a place for getting our facilities or whatever we choose, you choose that's important. And then the 16.67, I wouldn't feel comfortable not having that in our operating funds because that is a best practice and I think it does need to stay unencumbered. So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
I think that makes sense, especially when we just went through pages and pages and pages of projects that we're waiting to do. So if we were to reduce the reserve and free up those funds and have those separate for one-time things like improvements in the park that we didn't get funding for, or the boat ramp that we didn't get the grant for, stuff like that is kind of where I'm going with this. So what they all said.
Councilor Lucky.
So one other thing, especially since it's a high priority for you and I want to address it, is in the language for repayment, as Councilman Wiesner said, we presented us some options looking at what to do moving forward as far as possible reductions in this money set aside. If I could see some of the options of ways that you might think moving forward, some options on what that language might look like. In the GFO guidance, it talks about generally replenished within 1 to 3 years of use. So if there's something along those lines, especially delineating how much, is that just a third and a third and a third every year, or what does that 3-year replenishment look like?
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Help me out again, Tricia. We have the other, they're not restricted reserve, well, they're restricted to the equipment rental. We have reserves in the sewer enterprise fund, they're restricted to that. The stabilization fund is also restricted because it requires a majority vote of the council to do anything with it.
And it only is for emergencies and exigents.
And that is correct. Now, the history on this is that we were going through a very difficult, that was the beginning of the economic downturn, and things were very difficult here. And so long-term budgeting through at least with my involvement in, the former finance director guided me through this and actually helped me prepare the motion about $3 million of 15%, which is ever the greater of the two. I'm not really real supportive of just using it as a fund to go out and do special projects, because then it becomes a political cookie jar potentially. Not saying that it will, but it can be. For me, that fund is for emergencies. For example, something that could happen, but we don't know. We have no control over it. We could lose potentially CAPRON funds, and Public Works depends heavily on CAPRON funds. To me, that's a major surprise that we can't get prepared for in 30 days, 60 days, or maybe even 365 days. I would be more inclined to want to have for example, 15% or $2 million, which no less than $2 million, for example. 15%, but no less than $2 million has to stay in that stabilization fund. When I'm kind of running through some numbers very quickly here through my head, it kind of gets us down into that 2-3 month stabilization period.
But you're not counting the 16.67 that's sitting there for that also.
Say again, please.
16.67 is sitting in the streets fund right now as 2 month reserves. And if CAPRON funds went away, it wouldn't be the one-time money that we have there, would be a fix for a short period of time. They have 2 months sitting there. I don't have that number with me, but it's not budgeted. It's part of money that's not encumbered, cash that's sitting there that's not encumbered. So they have a protection. So if you do that plus 15%, you're still at over 30%. If that is what council wants, that's great.
But help me understand this. Again, if we talk about what's in reserve for Public Works,
Right.
that's restricted for replacing equipment.
No.
The rental pool.
The rental pool,
I'm sorry. I'm referring to the rental pool. That's for.
not just Public Works though, that's citywide.
Yeah.
Okay.
I understand.
Sorry.
But are you saying the rental pool is part of the reserve that you're including in the 38%?
Nope, what I'm including is what 16.67 of operating cash is removed from the beginning fund balance when we do the budget. So that's not ever, you never see that money in the budget because we budget our beginning fund balance. So we remove 16.67%. In addition, that's in all the funds. So the highway, the streets fund, that's there. General fund, we do that. We also then transfer into the stability reserve at the end of the year whatever our revenue was for the prior year, and if it's or greater than it. So I like your language of not greater than, but that then can be $1 million. So when you're trying to budget, like if we use that $7 million, we used it in a project. We didn't use it in general fund, but we're going to take from general fund $1 million to refill that stability fund, or between 700 and $1 million. That creates.
I got you. Okay.
That's where
Yeah.
that's the piece that I'm obviously not communicating well. That's the piece that I'd like us to address with whatever percent we come up with. And then the 502, when I was talking about it, we have interfund transfers, which you'll see in the budget document when I present it. Those monies come out of each fund for equipment that we replace. So police has 20 cars, 10 cars, whatever they have. Be off on my number of
And
cars.
so
And then every
You amortize those down and you put that money aside.
that money goes aside every month for an annual total that Sandra is instrumental in calculating what that would be to replace, and that money sits there and can only be used for that equipment that we're setting it aside for. So it's another way to segregate money that that we really aren't looking at percent on that at all.
So did I miss something? Just one more item. One of the council members say, would you prepare a recommended?
He was talking repayment language, because I say.
Yeah, a recommended repayment language.
Yes.
And how about a recommended formula? And maybe two options. Like I'm kind of like with Jim. I like to see what the options are. The language A, language B, the formula A, formula B.
So language with the formula.
That's
okay,
correct.
Perfect.
What you said, I was just, when you said when you asked what would we like you to quantify, had written down side-by-side comparisons, you know, if we went with 10% or 15% or 20, whatever that would look like. And also, it would be helpful to be able to see if you could create a visual of all of the different funds that we do have, reserve funds that we do have set aside, how much is in those, what those can be used for.
Sure.
Just personally, if I could picture that in my head and where all that is being funneled, that would help me to, you know, zero in on
Perfect.
on the one that we need to talk about. So that would be helpful.
Be happy to.
Thank you. When Councilman Larson was talking about repayment, third, it struck me, well, if it's a new project or a new thing, maybe the first year we would pay less. And then the next year you pay a little more, and the last year you pay the most. It kind of gives you just started out with the project or you just got it done. It might make sense that your first payment isn't just a wallop, but maybe a little, I don't know. You said to think out of the box.
I'm absolutely
so
glad you
trying
are.
to-
Yep.
But for some of the projects, that actually might make more sense than the same amount for the 3 or maybe 4 years. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't
I
have to be
think our
3
department
years.
heads could give some advice on the 3 or the 4. I mean, you don't want it forever.
No.
1 year's too much. But sometimes when you get something going, it would be nice to know that you're not quite leaping up,
Right.
but you are repaying and then building it up. So.
And I'd like to, and I'm hoping the language stops the bleed, because as the revenues go up, we could be repaying 3 payments,
Right.
and then also putting in a chunk of money to keep up with revenues, the one-time revenues that come through, or the things that happen that are putting our money that we have to do the calculation on at a significant level. So like the treatment plant, the increased sales tax and fees to the general fund. That's what has partially increased our revenues. Falsely a little bit, because
Right.
it's going to go away, but we do the calculation on the total revenue. So we don't take that into consideration. And that creates, in the year, if you don't have those kind of revenues, funding that's being moved.
But I think when you presented the budget, didn't you have, this is one time only because of the construction, this is our sales tax?
Yes.
But it's not gonna be there next year.
But the
or-
language is on actual revenues. It's
Okay.
not on budget.
So then maybe part of the language
Language.
needs to be when we know it's one-time funds or one-time,
Yeah.
what do you call it? It's not a gift, but when we get more than we expect.
Yeah. I'll put that as an optional part of language too.
Thank you, Mary.
Councilor Larson?
So we're just talking here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're just talking, yep.
So, a couple of things. I'm really, just as one council member's input, I'm not comfortable with any more than 3 years, just because there's nothing to say that as we're repaying that, we don't have to hit that fund again for something else, and then we get really far behind on money going back into there. I think it's a best practice at 3 years or less, just because we may have to use that fund again, and then if we are slowly paying this back. Generally, when banks extend their terms of service, it benefits the banks, and it keeps us in debt longer, and it gets them some more money. And just again, as one councilman's perspective, as you're looking at giving us options, this council member would probably prefer to see nothing less than a 25% combination as you're
Okay.
looking at those options, again, being a little bit more on the conservative side.
Yeah, the combination of the two doesn't make me as uncomfortable as the combined as we're currently doing now.
That makes sense to me, because you know, you're talking about when we first increased this, it was, you know, the economic downturn, and it was also around the time that we lost, you know, the Public Works Trust Fund funding in mid-project, and when the state took away our liquor tax revenue, and so there was a real sense of anxiety, funding anxiety up here. But you know, so we don't want to get too comfortable, but we also don't want to get too you know, too.
Yep,
Yeah, you know.
I do.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, one more time. Now, we are only looking at one segment of this. We're not looking at our budget globally right now.
No, I am in process of creating that, and the goal is when we create the budget, we'll see if we do have use of fund balance right now, if we're going to need that. I don't know that at this point.
And from the global view, and when Doug Merriman was here, he had this tortoise and hare curve that he
Yeah.
already showed. And that sticks in my mind because with inflation and cost, that's the hare, that's increasing that curve is increasing at an increasing rate. The tortoise is increasing at a lesser rate. And so the delta gets bigger and bigger if that's the case. So, and I'm simplifying this, at the global view, I would like to really get more into the global view before we refine the stabilization fund issue.
Okay.
I would rather work from the big picture down rather than from the increments upward at this stage.
Okay. So one part of the global, the hare and I'm just pleading my case, so I'm just take it in the spirit it's meant. So when you talk about the hare and the tortoise, right? With the hare, if we have a fund that says greater than, the hare jumps. He doesn't just go up, he takes a jump. So you're taking not only a portion, if the revenues go up, which potentially could support COLAs or changes in cost or whatever that comes through, when you have to transfer, not just to catch you back up, but to jump up to the next level,
Right.
the hare is really, costs are really going up because you're taking cash and not just moving it to meet whatever was in there, you're taking it and you're adding even more to it. So that creates to me, and especially for one-time expenses.
So you're saying the stabilization fund or our reserve, the
Right.
38%, that's the hair on the back of the rabbit. Is
Right, that
correct?
25%, if it was just 25%, it would still be a challenge.
But not as steep a curve.
Right, because we not only have cash that we have to repay out of general fund for a project, then we also have whatever
Okay.
revenues come in at. Then you can't really look backwards, you can't look forwards at that, you have to look backwards because you're looking at prior year
Right,
revenues.
right, yeah.
So both of those create kind of an anxiety within me because I don't want to say we can't do something based on something that may be too great. And it may not be. You guys may, like you said, you're conservative if you want to keep it that way. But I'm just telling you, no matter how many, how close we tighten the belt and pull up our overalls, it may not cut it if we continue this path. It might make it so it is very difficult.
So that the curve gets steeper and steeper
Yes.
unnecessarily.
Yes, but I do understand the conservative approach. I do understand wanting to make sure you have funding there for emergencies. But I think that we need to hopefully come up with a plan that works for the long term.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all I have.
Anyone else?
So Mayor, when would you guys like me to bring this back?
Tomorrow.
Yesterday.
Next meeting, next workshop, which one would you prefer?
Thanks.
Councilor Servadius?
Yeah, I mean, workshop or a council meeting, as much time as you need to prepare, if we get another look at it,
Okay.
I think we'd all then kind of look at those options and language and be able to refine it. It sounds like you want at least some repayment language
Yes,
fairly soon.
yes, please.
And, I mean, the hope would be do this in one sitting, but maybe it happens in two, but
Right.
as fast as you
Okay,
are comfortable.
Yeah, I was going to suggest the same thing, that if you've got it so that, got them split, so that it could be that they're not ready to make the final
Yep.
decision on the amount, but the repayment,
okay,
a couple of options, sooner the better.
sounds good.
Good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your participation
We
and your
will
ideas.
move on to item B, under finance, fire fee.
Another handout for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. They all have their own thing. I was way more efficient than I thought I was. Here you go. Let me see. The first one is probably mine, Mayor. Yeah.
Okay, get it back.
Sorry about that. Here's the rest of them. There you go. So they're all with the paper clip.
Oh,
Yeah, you take the whole paper clip.
okay, got it.
Thank
Okay.
you. Sorry about that. Thanks.
How about if I trade you?
No, that was the last one.
three parts. This is for you to have to review before I come to a council meeting asking for action. So I'll go through the PowerPoint, and then if you have questions, this is going to be shorter. So there was a Swantown annexation agreement back in May of 1993 between the city and MKM Associates. Section 11 dealt with the fire protection and mandated a $200 fee per property for development of a fire protection station in the area. The agreement restricted the use of the funds for purchase of land and or buildings for a fire station located within 1 mile of the property. The agreement also states if not used, the money must be returned within 5 years of its deposit. The city has surpassed the allowable retention period and has determined that we will not be able to use these funds as required in the time allowed. This is the schedule of fire fees that need to be repaid. $71,800 is required to be returned in 2018. $4,600 is required to be returned in 2018. $5,200 is required to be returned in 2020, and the $400 is required to be returned in 2021. The majority of the funding will come from the stabilization fire fees reserve, which is where it's set, and there is $81,800. The additional $200 will have to be paid for out of the general fund. And that's it. So basically, there was a misunderstanding prior to my arrival of what this could be used for. At one point, it was thought that it could be used for feasibility study. Another point, there was other thoughts. Well, time has flown by, and we're at the point where we didn't use it for land or building a fire station, and therefore we can't keep it. So the annexation agreement describes what was in it. The list here that you have, the second list is actually a list of all the addresses. We removed citizens' names so that you can see what addresses were part of that Swantown agreement. And it's a housekeeping item. We really don't have an option. I had legal took a look at it. Funny took a look at it more than once. They actually had a memo back in 2007 that addressed this. I think at the time they were hoping that there would be something we could use it for, but it wasn't used for that. Other than that, I have no information other than I know it needs to be repaid. And I'm looking at Steve, Kathy's not here, that if there's like hysterical questions, I'm going to let them answer it because I can't answer anything other than when we were looking at using it for the feasibility study, being accountants and anal retentive, we went ahead and pulled all the documents and discovered this, so.
Councilor Holmberg?
Thank you, Mayor. These funds were collected, and I haven't read the annexation agreement. And that
Right,
stuff
that's
right
why I provided
But
it.
the funds were collected. There is a repayment schedule. But some of the funds were already spent for this purpose.
We didn't spend those funds, we used general fund because when we started to plan to spend them, we started looking because we wanted backup for the journal entry we were going to utilize. And when we pulled the documentation, the memory that we were presented with was not supported by the documents we pulled. So that's what led us to.
So the 65 plus or minus $1,000 that we
Came out of general
paid
fund.
for preliminary engineering architectural services can't be applied against this
No.
based on the language of the
Yeah,
agreement.
we were hoping it could. I'm telling you, we looked and we looked, but what we found was an absolute no.
So this money goes to the wind.
It goes back to all the citizens, so they get an early Christmas present. And we get a.
Jesse, could you please put that in the newspaper?
And we're being so kind.
Councilor Zervania.
Thank you. So we just use our best efforts to find these folks, because some of these people probably.
We're going by address, so luckily we have utilities to most of these addresses, and it goes to the current resident. It won't go to the prior. Yeah, whoever purchased the property What's the legal language?
Well, that would have been incorporated into the cost of the home. The impact fees or fire fees would have been incorporated into the cost of the home, and so it would have been attributed to the purchaser of the home.
And it's an obligation that ran with the land.
Another legal question.
Counselor Holmberg.
These are impact fees? No,
They're
Fire service fees.
fire service fees, because I believe the impact fee would go back to with interest.
It's not an impact.
Okay. Jesse? Oak Harbor citizens get windfall.
Really tiny windfall.
Counselor Larson.
So this money's already set aside. We put this aside, so now instead of using it for its intended purpose, we're just returning it, except instead of to the
Yes.
developers, to the homeowners.
Yes.
Anyone else? So, Counselor Wiesen.
This one might be a stretch, but I notice the language says if not used, the money must be returned within 5 years of its deposit unless subsequent agreement authorizes continued retention by the city.
We actually looked into that, so I'll let Nikki tell you the answer to that.
There isn't a subsequent agreement after the annexation agreement.
But could one be entered into? And who would it be entered into with the original?
The property owners, well, so this runs with the land, so it would be the current property owners that you would enter into agreements with.
Okay, so not right. All right, thank
We
you.
wish that would work, because that was one of the things we were hoping for, but that's not something we could do.
We talked that one to death, Joe.
We did.
Yeah, trying to figure out how we can make that work.
Yeah.
We met on this
Multiple
several
times.
times and had very lengthy conversations about potential options or potential solutions, and we weren't able to make this one work.
Counselor Serpides.
So it just is the obvious question, but how did we, if this started in 93, after 5 years was 98, it just got overlooked for that many years?
Well, I think actually the somewhat ironic part of this is that the majority of those fees would have been collected well after 1998, because development in that area didn't really take off until after approximately 2001.
Oh, good point. So I see
2001
that
is when
the
they
list
started.
of years
Yeah.
was deposited 5
Yeah.
years from there.
Yeah. And so the annexation agreement took place, and then what came after that was, because of the flooding issues that took place in the golf course basin all those years ago, there was a significant stormwater study that had to be done by the proponents before they could move into the platting process, and that took a few years. And then the platting process takes a few years after that. So by the time they started actually building those homes, we really weren't collecting those fees until, again, about 2001-ish.
Anyone else?
So I'll be bringing this forward on the October 18th meeting in a resolution.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to our last item, and it is police. Police Chief Dresker is back with us to discuss WAIF contract amendments. Chief?
Yes, thank you again. We talked about the WAIF potential modifications in a prior meeting. I wanted to just update you. We're not prepared to bring any action item towards you, but I wanted to fill you in on where we're at. Obviously, this is one of the areas as part of the strategic planning and allocation of resources that I've been looking at. So I just want to let you know that we're finishing up on the details of a modified WAIF contract and to have that ready to go for all parties involved when it's appropriate. I did talk with the local veterinarian again today. They're still amenable and agreeable to if we want to enter into an agreement with them for temporary housing of animals. They're still good with that. We haven't started any actual drawing up of any document yet as we're going along, but we will. I did talk to the WAIF director, I think it was 2 days ago. He was asking about the status. I've informed him we was going to have this conversation. I think we have it for October 2nd to potentially bring it to you for a vote for the contract to authorize signature. And they're still go. And then legal has sent a couple of queries out to the property owner of the building we currently lease, and we're waiting return from that property owner as to some lease options based on our lease, which expires in May of 2019, and as to whether or not we terminate it earlier if we proceed with this modification process. And also, one of the things that I had proposed in that presentation was potentially moving our holding time from 6 days down to 5 days if we do this modification, to be consistent with what Island County currently does. And again, this will all come back to you if we, as we move forward with this process. If we do have move forward and we do have to maintain that lease, it's okay. We can still move forward. We'll still save, based on some reduction in staffing, the modification with the WAIF contract would still save around $32,000 from the 1st of November to that May, the end of May. If we maintain the lease, we won't save as much as we would for the 1 year with the figures I've gave you before, but we'd still save around $32,000 in that period of time, transition into an effective process and be on track if we choose to do that, if that's the way it goes. And right now, if everything were to come together in perfect timing type of thing, I would anticipate that if we move forward with this, we'd be looking at November as far as doing the modified contract and moving forward with that process. And then also just animal control, just to update you, we will be identifying that person. We've done the chief's the interviews with the people, and we'll be moving forward with the selection here in the real near future. So I just wanted to give you guys an update on that, and then if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions? Okay, thanks, Chief.
Okay.
And I was looking at the front page only. We have 3 items under Public Works, A, B, and C. So our Public Works Director, Kathy Rosen, has joined us. And we'll start with item number A, RV dump station locations.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. A few months ago, we talked about the RV dump station as we were beginning implementation on phase 1 of Windjammer Park improvements. As we started that, the RV sewer dump station was decommissioned, and we were asked to consider some new locations and bring those back for a new sewer dump station along with some estimates. So that is what we're going to present today. We looked at 3 different locations, which is the existing Public Works Recycle Transfer Station off of Goldie Road. We have a Public Works access road off of Goldie that goes up into our old landfill area, as well as the marina. And I wanted to throw out a 4th alternative, and you might see why as we get further into this, and that is to not construct a new RV dump station in the city. So this is a map of the potential locations, the 3 potential locations. And upon initial analysis and discussion with our solid waste staff, it was determined that our existing Public Works transfer station location is really not feasible because we use that on a daily basis, and there's really no good way to prevent conflicts with our existing operations and the public coming in to use an RV dump station. So we looked at the other 2 more closely, the other 2 locations. So this would be near the Public Works access road off of Goldie, and it would be a pullout off of Goldie Road. And the engineering staff did a pretty detailed but high-level cost estimate for that. It's a little over $250,000 to do that work. $258,000. And some of the concerns that we have are it would reduce our ability to use that property in the future. It would be limited to right-in, right-out only access, and it would trigger the LID requirements, which increase those costs. So the next option we looked at was the marina. And again, staff did a pretty detailed look at the cost, and that is $272,000. It would require upgrading the lift station there And I know that Steve Beebe has some concerns because we've had odor issues down there in the past. And he would be worried that if we had an RV dump station that there just might not be enough flow to prevent those odors, the odor issue. So it would also eliminate 20 boat trailer parking spaces. It would exacerbate that queuing that sometimes happens at the Maui gate and makes it difficult for people to access the marina. The RVs would have to circulate through the marina parking lot. It's quite a distance from the highway, making it a little more difficult for RVs to access. And we would have to upgrade that lift station, which is a pretty significant cost. So some things that I think we should take into some consideration when we did have the RV dump station at Windjammer Park. It was an honor system, but these were the revenues that we received, an average of less than $2,600 a year. And if
Those
we...
are net numbers?
Yes. No, those are the gross numbers. It doesn't include the staff collecting the money. So, and if we accept cash, we have a very involved process in collecting cash. We have to have 2 employees go out to collect the cash, and then we have to have 2 separate employees count the money, so that there's no the possibility of someone taking that money is reduced. Some other considerations: there are RV dump stations nearby, including Deception Pass State Park, South Whidbey State Park, Washington Park Campground in Anacortes. The Lions Club in both Burlington and Mount Vernon have installed RV dump stations at some parks as a fundraiser. Camping World in Burlington has a dump station that people can use for free, and there is a website that you can go to. I'm sure there's also an app, rvdumps.com. When we first closed the RV dump station, I think the utilities office and our staff were getting quite a few calls. Where can I go? Where can I go? So we gave them a list off of RV dumps. I talked to Chaz this morning. She says they are not getting any more calls. Debbie says we're not getting any more calls. So I think that people have found a way to take care of their RV dump station needs. And so I'm just wondering, in my mind, if it's worth that big of an investment of capital funds.
Coopville has that.
They do not. I spoke with
took it
Coop.
out?
They took it out about 6 years ago, but they are in the process of, they're in discussions right now to maybe put in one somewhere else. It's no longer at the treatment plant.
Kathy, the Navy base, I mean, if you have a military ID, they have one, correct?
I don't know. I didn't.
I think they do out when they redid the.
Oh, out at
site.
Rocky Point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's very nice out there.
To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense,
Especially with so many other things going on, to spend almost $300,000 on a not essential service. I can think of a lot of things we could do with that money. Then I was going to make a bad dump it in the ground pun for Steve, but yeah, I say we get out of the RV dump business.
Councilor Larson?
Yeah, I was initially a proponent of looking at these options because, we took a few things away with the development of Windjammer Park, but seeing what the actual cost is. I mean, granted, people have stopped calling because eventually they're going to stop calling. I don't think it reduces the need, but I don't think looking at these numbers that we can finance that need, that although it may still remain, that's cost prohibitive.
Well, I just hold out, I agree, I hold out great hope when that private solution is developed that they will provide an RV dump station.
I'd like to see those numbers. So.
Which numbers?
Could you just email them to me?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, the breakdown.
I'll email you the whole presentation.
Good, thank
That'd
you.
be great to all of us.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Roll?
Does that say it all for me? Yes.
Okay, we'll move on then, if there's no more questions, to B, solid waste truck replacements.
And I am going to let Sandra make this presentation.
Good afternoon, council members and mayor. We are only going to be talking about one truck today, and you've seen a lot of these slides before. They've just been updated. This slide here just shows you that we're going to be talking about truck 63 and where the progression is for all of the other replacements that we've already done. A lot of them have turned from order to completed. We've received them and everything's going well. The second slide you've also seen before, it shows you all of our purchasing tools that are available to us. And I highlighted the one piggybacking purchasing tool because that's the one we're going to utilize with this replacement. This is the truck we're talking about. It's one of the oldest refuse solid waste trucks that we have. It's a 2006. It was purchased in 2006. It has a 7-year life cycle. It's currently on year 12. We have patched it and repaired it and made it last longer than anticipated, and that's great. We utilize this truck Monday through Friday during the months of March through November for the yard waste program, and then once the yard waste program goes to once a month, it's used during for 1 week during December and February. When it's not being used for yard waste, it can also be used as a backup truck to one of the residential trucks if they're in the shop or if they're off-site. This just tells you a little bit about what's going on. The hopper's worn out. It's already been patch replaced, as I've said. The engine and the hydraulic system are worn out. They will need to be replaced. Based on our heavy-duty vehicle replacement guideline, which we talk about often, it has all of the different conditions that it needs to meet to be able to be replaced. Condition 4 is right before condition 5, which means do not even put it on the road. So we're not quite to do not put it on the road, but we are towards the end here. This just is a chart that shows you currently what it was budgeted was $350,000. We have $426,000 available. We do not have solid numbers, but the vendor has told us that it's going to be around the $350,000 mark. So that number will be finalized once you see it when it comes to council. So that's pretty good that we've inflated it enough to where we knew where it was going to be. And just also I put in there that what it was purchased for back in 2006 was $191,000. So you can see how much it's increased since then. This is the RCW. You've seen this chart again. It's about the piggybacking and how we're authorized to use it. We've had an interlocal agreement with City of Tacoma since 1998. They just have awarded their contract for almost $6 million for just refuse trucks. So we are using their buying power, their leverage to get us the best price that we can get. And that's why we've chosen to piggyback off of them. What it does is there's a lot of options on their contract that allows us to pick and choose what's best for the city of Oak Harbor. We're not stuck with whatever City of Tacoma purchased. We're able to do what they call a write-on letter and say, this is what we need versus what they accepted, and that's how we come up with our numbers. However, the base price is the same, coming from their $6 million contract. And as I said, we'll be bringing forward this agenda bill on October 16th, and at that time we'll have the final numbers. You've seen this slide as well. We've asked, is there an electric refuse truck option? There is not one that's been proven. We've also talked about the biodiesel, and I don't know if we mentioned this before, but we did do a biodiesel, 100% biodiesel demonstration probably a good 10 years ago. It did not go well. We used one of the worst trucks we had just to make sure we wouldn't void any warranties and we wouldn't destroy anything that was, really needed. It didn't give them enough power. It's just not there yet. So this just covers ourselves for that new RCW about electric and or biodiesel vehicles. In your packet that was sent out a week ago, we thought we were going to be bringing forward number 26. As a team, we've decided that it's not ready to go, so we will be rebudgeting that one for 2019. And that's all we have. Pretty easy.
Questions? Any other questions?
You have a picture of it, maybe the basic truck that we're buying?
It's gonna look a lot.
Oh, just like
yeah,
that
it's
one?
still gonna be
Okay.
a Peterbilt chassis, and it's either gonna be a Wayne or a Labrie body, very similar to what you just saw.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, nothing too crazy.
Doesn't have flames on the side.
It could if you'd like it to, but no.
Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. So is the 353, is that base or that's what we anticipate
That's-
with the options we'll need? Or
That's what they've estimated at this time without us seeing their write-on letter is about 353, and that includes tax. So I'm not sure where it would go once we actually see the write-on, but they know what we need. They've dealt with us for many years, so we're pretty confident it's really close. but the numbers were not available at this time. So.
Anyone else?
Bless you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sandra. Then we will move on to item number C, recycle cost increase.
Yeah, so global problems coming to Oak Harbor. In January of 2018, China, who was the biggest importer of our recyclable materials, stopped taking 24 foreign recyclables and reduced the amount of the allowable contamination of recyclables from 5% to 0.5%. And this, the biggest impacts of the recyclable market are mixed paper, think junk mail, and mixed plastics, which are your number 3 through number 7. If you look on the plastic bottle or plastic container, it has a number on it. So this change has created, I think, pretty extreme volatility in the global recycling markets. We've been taking our recyclables to Island Disposal, not Island County, but Island Disposal, for $45 a ton. We received notification that effective August 1st, 2018, Island Disposal is going to start charging us $94.35 a ton for those recyclable materials, so more than double. By comparison, the tipping fee that we pay at the Island County transfer station for solid waste disposal is $109 a ton. So recyclables are approaching the cost of solid waste, but they're not there yet.
Question.
Yes.
While you're on that. If it's reaching the point of solid waste, why would we have two separate
Let
operations?
me get to that. There's an RCW that says urban areas have to have a curbside recycling program. That's why. And there's also, when I first started work here 20 years ago, our solid waste actually went to Island County Transfer Station. But Island County had a contract with a landfill in the state of Oregon. And in order to take our solid waste to Oregon, we had to implement a curbside recycling program. That was in 1997 when that first started. So Island County's contract is now over in eastern Washington for disposal at a landfill. However, that could change again because they renegotiate that contract or go out for bid for where they're going to dispose of the solid waste every 5 years or so. So we are required by state law to have one, and we might have to have one regardless, depending on where our solid waste goes. So the amount of recyclables that we collected in 2017 was a little less than 1,300 tons, and 2018 we're a little bit more than 1,300 tons so far this year.
Projected or so far?
So far, because we haven't finished the end of the year, so that's where we're at. We'll be able to absorb that cost increase in 2018. However, we're going to need to, we have bumped up our disposal costs in the 2019-2020 budget to reflect these cost increases, and I believe that Patricia has forwarded this information off to Sean Korn at HDR so he can look and see if there's an impact to the rates. I have a few other thoughts about this. I think there was something in the newspaper not too long ago, the Whitby News Times, about the recyclers at the county transfer stations not reducing the number of plastics that they'll take, the kinds of plastics. As you can see, recyclables cost less for us to dispose of than solid waste, just by a little bit, but still less. If we were to do something like that, it would increase our solid waste costs. So it really wouldn't result in a savings to us, and it may impact an individual customer's solid waste rates, because if they couldn't recycle the plastics as they currently are, they may have to then go to a larger trash can, garbage can, and that costs more money for them. So my recommendation at this time is that we just kind of see where things go. If Island Disposal starts saying you can't bring this kind of plastic, that kind of plastic to us anymore, or that kind of thing, then I think we need to look at it again. But at this point, I just wanted to let you know that we have experienced a big increase in our recycling costs.
Yeah, may not be relevant to this, but the China thing, is that related to the tariff battle going on? Is this tit for tat kind of thing, or do you know, or does it matter?
There may be some of that, but I think China also, because their economy has been booming and consumerism there, they've created a lot of their own waste, and they were tired, you know, one article I read said they were just tired of being America's dumping grounds. I mean, not the world's dumping grounds, not America's, but the world's dumping grounds.
So it's really, a lot of the recycles are really not a product that can be recycled then, is that where this is going?
They're just
That I
recycled
don't know.
somewhere else.
Well, if nobody's taking it, there must not be any value.
Well, I think the world is looking to create new markets for it. It really is a global problem. It's not just an American problem, a Washington State problem. It's global.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a campaign planned out quickly before the first of the year to let ratepayers know as soon as you hear from Sean? Because, you know, the phones are gonna be ringing. They're not gonna want to pick up a phone once they see that their rates are going up because of that. I know because we got the email about start thinking about purging your paper before October 1st. But our ratepayers, I don't think anybody's aware, and you know the phones will just go bananas.
Well, I think it was a few months ago, and Patricia, if you're still here, you can help me with this if need be. Sean Korn came to council and presented his preliminary results of a rate analysis. And other than the wastewater treatment plant, he was recommending a 2% increase already in solid waste. We haven't had a rate increase or rate adjustment in solid waste for more than 10 years. What we had built up a big reserve because at one time there was a thought on the part of some council members that we should build our own recycle transfer station and process the recyclables and market them ourselves. And so we developed this reserve for that purpose. Obviously we didn't go that way, and what we've been doing over the last 10 years or so is buying down the rates, keeping the rates steady by using up that reserve. So now that reserve is gone, and now we're at a point where we're going to need to start thinking about like a little cost of living adjustment moving forward in solid waste. One way that people in the past have been able to reduce their solid waste costs is to recycle more. So that's why I'm hesitant to not take anything off the table in terms of recyclables for our customers right now, because then it'll end up in their garbage can and they might have to go to a bigger one, which costs them more money.
Councilor Larson? Oh,
I just want to
Patricia.
let you know, if you would like, I can resend out the PowerPoint that Sean did so that you guys can see what his recommendations were. I'll do that in this meeting.
Right, but with this new information, that's probably.
It's not there yet, but it's doubling from
Right now, we
45 to 90.
yeah, but our cost, I think, if I remember right, was around $60,000 a year.
Yeah, the
So-
$65,000 change.
Yeah, so when you look at across our entire customer base, I can't imagine that it's going to be a huge impact on the rates at this point. We're not expecting a rate increase over the next budget cycle from Island County and their tipping fees. So 1920, we've been assured that tipping fee will remain at $109 a ton. So it's just the recyclable portion of it. We're not adding any additional staff. We've got money set aside for the truck replacement. It's just an increase in our recycling costs that we're facing.
Is that it? Councilor Weiser?
Yeah, I was just gonna comment, it sounds like it's $65,000 a year, roughly about 12,000 households. You know, it means about a $5 or $6 a year hit per household. So, I mean, it's something we're gonna have to deal with, obviously, but I don't know that it's huge numbers.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Kathy. So that concludes the items on our agenda except for city council. Anybody have anything in addition? Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Are we, I know there's a lot on staff's plate, but we need to have some type of priority list to turn in legislature by just before January 1st. I don't know if we have any culprits, but they passed that, I mean, some cities are gonna be hit with millions, if not $1 billion worth of having to redo those. I didn't know if we had any in the city, I couldn't think of one, or if we annex, if there's one in the county that we would have to take over and rebuild. But that's gonna be a huge issue in the other cities. So I'm just, I don't think we have a culvert, do we, that we have to? But some of those things are starting to come and.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. With that, we're adjourned.